This is a story that everyone knows, because at one time or another it has happened to each and every one of us. It could have happened anywhere, but let us be specific and say it happened in Chicago, where it seems that many things, good and bad, occurred there. The man's name was, let's just say, Jonathan Spry. His wife's name was Judith, and they had a small son who was perhaps 8 years old. Jonathan wasn't handsome, for though he was 6 feet, he was skinny as a beanpole. He had brown hair with large waves in it, and his face was well ordinary. He had gray eyes and a nose that a million other people have. His chin was weak, but he had a nice smile. Let us sum him up and say he was just an average, ordinary man. His wife Judith was a woman whose face you would never remember except for possibly that hard mouth of hers. Also, if you knew her very well, you would have noticed her eyes, which were terribly hard and, strange to say, quite cruel. The little boy, whose name I don't remember, was, well, just a little boy, skinny like his father, with a sallow complexion. He was terribly quiet, for he rarely spoke to anyone, so that one wouldn't get to know him. However, I should always remember something about him that seemed at the time so strange. That was his eyes. They seemed much too large for him, and when he looked at you, it seemed as though something inside of you would snap, or his eyes looked just like those of a beaten dog. There is also a storekeeper in our story. She needs no description, for she was like 1,000 other storekeepers. And I must not forget our other characters, the landlady in the house a few doors down, and the tenant who stayed there for a week. There isn't much to our story, and why I'm writing it down I'll never know. It began when the Sprys moved into the house next to the store, which was also owned by the landlady. It had been vacant for a few months previously, and so naturally everyone was so pleased to have someone living in the house. They moved in just the same as everyone else does, and in the same manner they became acquainted with the neighborhood. As every other family did, they started to trade with the grocery lady. She told her he was in business and named the shop, which everyone knew was doing quite well. And just as everyone else had told her this story, so did he. As the time went on, he started to charge things at her store, but always paid for them. His wife would sometimes come to the store, but it was a rare occurrence. You never saw her, which naturally made people remark, "What a quiet young lady." The little boy, strange to say, always went about in overalls that were tattered with large patches at the knee. It seemed so strange, for their mother and father always went about well-dressed. The tenant and the landlady became well acquainted with the Sprys. He loved to talk of politics, and so did Mrs. Spry. So that pretty soon they got along famously together. They started inviting each other over to their home and really enjoyed each other's company. Then one night, Mr. Spry invited the tenant over for a party he was throwing. It was a wonderful party. You drank as much as you could hold and had a damn good time. They spoke of everything from Cicero to who was going to run for Congress. And to the tenant's great astonishment, Mr. Spry knew about it all. It was certainly too bad when the party broke up, for the tenant had had such a good time, and he was also terribly sorry, for he was going to another city and wouldn't see Mr. Spry again. They said goodbye and all that stuff. When you're leaving a friend you probably won't see again. As he got on the train the next day, he was thinking about Mr. Spry and the wonderful privilege he had had in being able to know such a swell guy. No, sir, you didn't meet up with a man like that so often. Now that Mr. Spry is a man who is a credit to the community, a man who typifies what the American of today should be. Boy, I wish I were like that. And as his thoughts rambled on, they also kept coming back to the wallet he had lost yesterday. He was sure he'd taken it to the party, but they hadn't found it, so he guessed he had lost it just before, although he didn't know how. And so the tenant fades from our story. Just another human being who you might have met. Yes, just look at anyone who is trying to enjoy life with a little bit of work attached, and that is our tenant. Now we would like to bring the landlady into the picture. 3 days after the party, strange as it seems, she had just come from the Spries, and they were gone. She could not find hide nor hair of them, and when she called up their business, she had found that was closed too. And imagine them moving out and owing her the month's rent. What had hurt her even worse was what she had found in the house itself. It looked as though it hadn't been cleaned since they had moved in, and horrors above horrors. When she had seen what they had left, the little boys sleep in, well, she could have killed them. To think they would still leave that old box laying around. The gunny sacks that she at first thought was for a dog. Why, that poor little tyke, no wonder he always looked half-starved. I'll bet he hardly even got fed. And no wonder he stayed away from home all day. Why, the day I gave him that cake, and from the way he gobbled it up, oh my, the way he thanked me for it. Why didn't I give him more? If I ever lay my hands on that man or woman, leaving all those whiskey bottles laying around, no wonder she was quiet. She must have been drunk all day, while I have to work all day long to earn a little money, and then having them beat me out like that. Oh yes, I mentioned a grocery lady, didn't I? Well, I believe you know what she was thinking about. For what do they usually think when they are beat out of the credit she'd given, and when a check she'd cashed came back marked as no funds? Well, I'll leave it to you. Now my story's told. Why, I'll never know.